LiberalViewer presents.
So before I went to VidCon to participate on a panel to discuss the state of copyright, YouTube's policies, and what fair use really means, I made a video about the two issues I was planning to raise with the YouTube representative there, Victoria Grand, and I was able to raise both issues not only with Victoria Grand, but also with a second representative from YouTube on the panel, Glenn Brown, a YouTube lawyer who's worked in the copyright area. But while I got to raise my two issues, I didn't always like the answers I got. As you can see, for example, when I raised the issue of imposing more human supervision over YouTube's Content ID copyright matching software in this clip.
For your flagging system, you don't ever change the status of a video until a human being's looked at it.
Yeah.
But for this video ID system, you do. It's just all by machine, gets taken down immediately, and it takes a long time to get a human being to review it for monetization if you're submitting it as a partner video. And for a lot of people, they're afraid to dispute stuff. They're not a lawyer. So a lot of people, when they get that message, they're just not going to do anything. So why not put a human being in that system like there is in the flagging system?
They're completely different things. So this is a great theme. I'm glad you asked about it. So remember when YouTube was first blowing up, and it's right around the time before Google bought it, Mark Cuban was on his blog talking about, if there's no porn on YouTube, how come they can't screen for copyright? And just purely as a matter of logic, they're two different things. A human being can look at a video and say, with certain criteria, okay, this is nudity, right? This is nudity in a context that we don't want on the site. It's not scientific, etc. You literally cannot look at a file and know whether or not it's copyright infringing. A human being, other than the copyright holder or a judge, cannot look at a video and say, this is a copyright issue. So
even if we hired 10,000 lawyers to look at all the videos, we still would not know with a degree of certainty whether it was permitted to be on the site or whether it wasn't. If it was a Fox News clip, whether there was permission, whether there wasn't. If it was a UGC clip, whether there was permission, whether there wasn't.
We would make mistakes in both directions if we had a human being doing copyright stuff. We would make mistakes. We'd leave things up that might look homemade because even though that's a terrible indicator of whether or not something's authorized, because everything's copyrighted when someone makes it. The question is whether it's authorized. We would take some of those down and we'll leave some of those up, and they might actually be from a TV network that makes homemade looking videos. There's lots of videos that have gone up on the site that literally in the same week, the copyright holder will say, take this down, and then a couple days later, their marketing department will come back and go, actually, can you put it?
That's what we saw a lot of in VidCon.
Well, I agree that it's a difficult thing for a person to do, but a machine can't do it either. And these machines are taking down videos without any human being involvement, fair use videos. And a lot of people never get them put back up. And for partners, it takes 30 days before it can be monetized.
So two different things there. One, it's not like machines are deciding things arbitrarily. We're actually basing it on a reference file that we get from a copyright holder along with a preference that they want, whether they want to block it or track it or monetize it.
But that doesn't tell you whether it's fair use or not.
It does not, which is why you have the chance to appeal it.
The machine enables a dialogue between the two parties that are basically in the position to decide.
Well, why not enable that dialogue while the video is still up?
Yeah, I think that's the problem there. Is that
why disable the video?
Takedown.
Right, I think that gets to the rock and the hard place, and of course, I'm sure there's nothing more annoying than hearing corporations whine. but the idea is we're always treading this balance between balancing a user's need to freely express themselves with what it will require for us to do to keep YouTube up.
No, I don't completely buy Victoria Grand's argument there that in order for YouTube to stay up, their Content ID software has to presume fair users guilty of copyright infringement until they prove themselves innocent, and she seemed to recognize herself that exaggerates the role of the Content ID software in protecting YouTube from legal liability earlier in the discussion when she commented on the recent ruling in Viacom's lawsuit against YouTube by saying,
one of the things that the case said was that the DMCA takedown regime was sufficient to basically avoid liability. And I think that's super critical because YouTube has kind of, over the years, gone above and beyond that and created a Content ID system. But a lot of startups aren't going to be in the position to be able to do that and aren't going to have the resources to be able to create, more robust technological solutions. And so it's really a good day for the internet.
Now, I agree with Victoria Grand's interpretation there of the recent ruling from the judge in the Viacom case and its importance to the internet, but then if, like she says, the DMCA takedown system is sufficient to protect YouTube from liability, she can't also then argue that YouTube is only protecting itself by balancing its Content ID software system so that a machine can presume fair users guilty of copyright infringement. And In fact, I think the real reason for that balance is that YouTube just doesn't really like fair use, and that's not just my conjecture from reading between the lines, because in fact at least 4 separate times YouTube Representative Glenn Brown expressed YouTube's discomfort with fair use, first early on with this advice.
The safest course is to make it all yourself or get permission for it all and have a paper trail. That's the safest course. If you don't ever want to have a problem down the line, if you don't want to get in trouble for any kind of copyright questions.
And a few minutes later, Glenn Brown repeated his advice as the YouTube policy he described here.
Our policy is to encourage people either to make everything themselves or to clear everything they might have any questions about. And so we encourage you basically just we don't encourage you to include other people's stuff that includes other people's rights, basically because it's so difficult to make those kinds of assessments. So it's so case by case that fair use is a really difficult thing to know whether or not you need permission on.
And in case you missed it, he said it again here.
We dare say, because it's so tricky, we just encourage people to get all the rights that they need, have a nice strong paper trail around it, or just make everything themselves.
And finally, specifically responding to the balance in favor of copyright holders and against fair use in the Content ID system, Glenn Brown explained.
If it's a Content ID recognition and the video comes down, you get a message immediately saying your video's come down, and if you disagree with it, you can reinstate it and object to it. And if you're not sure about the footing you're on, then we strongly recommend that you don't use other people's stuff. Right. I mean, if you don't feel confident in disputing the claim, then don't use other people's stuff in the video. Yeah. I can't say it's like an easy calculation when you're trying to use footage or you're trying to do something that comments on something else. It's very hard. Sure. And it's not always a satisfying answer to say, if you're in doubt, leave it out. But we're talking about dealing with everybody in the world who's potentially uploading videos and every copyright holder in the world and balancing all those interests.
So the balance Glenn Brown was talking about there is pretty clearly weighted in favor of copyright holders and against fair use, which is a little disappointing given that fair use is actually an integral part of Google's business model in other areas like Google News searches that excerpt news stories and Google Book searches that excerpt books. But I am glad that YouTube has at least created dispute mechanisms for fair users who are willing to stand up for their content, even if it doesn't always work out so smoothly for YouTube partners like me hoping to quickly monetize our videos. And I was also a little heartened by at least the beginnings of a response I heard from the YouTube representatives on the other issue I raised for my viewers, the issue of DMCA abuse that you can see me raise in this clip.
I wanted to bring up one more topic because my viewers are going to kill me if I don't bring up the DMCA abuse issue. You talked a little bit about there being consequences for filing false content ID stuff. But it's a big problem on YouTube that people file DMCA takedowns when they don't really own the copyright, or they do it to harass people or to get the personal information from the counter notice. And does YouTube do anything to try to go after people who file bogus DMCA takedown notices? So I don't know if we've gone after anybody yet. It's a possibility that we might at some point.
I would say never on that. It's a challenge because you could spend infinite resources trying to sue people, and it might not deter certain people that are just really eager to try to get a video down. Of course, they're violating the law by doing that.
Is there any way you can protect the personal information? One thing when I was researching for this, I noticed that you can't sue in the United States unless you register your copyright. Is there any way you could like hold the personal information until you got like evidence that a lawsuit was going to be filed or something like that? I don't know. I mean, I'd have to actually look into the details on that. But a lot of people are, I've seen it happen to like 100 people at least, that, that there are these fake DMC takedowns that suspended a lot of accounts, and it's not the real copyright holder, it's just harassing people doing this. So.
Or even if it's a copyright holder that doesn't actually have
Right, well that's just another issue too.
So one thing everybody should know is that we have anybody in the world can file a DMCA takedown notice, right? All they do is swear under penalty of perjury they're the copyright owner, that they think their stuff's in this video, that they think it's a copyright violation, and take it down. And then, like I said, there are ways for people to sue them back if they think they've made a mistake or they've abused the process. That's just for kind of if somebody wants to fax in a DMCA takedown notice, or the email or DMCA alias. For all the Content ID stuff, all the kind of turbocharged tools and all that, and we put conditions on how people use that stuff. So if someone's abusing it, and if someone's not using it the right way, we'll definitely first send a strong message saying, you may have not realized what you were doing here. These are really powerful tools and they can ruin people's videos and they can limit free speech if they're used incorrectly. But we definitely have terms in place with anybody who has access to the kind of turbo tools, including things like electronic DMCA takedowns and things like that.
Now, I especially like Glenn Brown's recognition near the end there that YouTube copyright tools can, quote, ruin people's videos and limit free speech, unquote, and I did hear some willingness to take on DMCA abuse, although without any real commitment, but I heard enough to motivate me not only to try to continue the dialogue with YouTube on this, but also to try to reach out to some advocacy groups that work in this area, and maybe even to some government agencies to see if I can help organize some kind of DMCA abuse victims help center website that would allow victims to report lawbreakers in a way that could lead to some real consequences. At least that's what I'm thinking, but I want to know what you think. Would you support some kind of DMCA abuse victims help center to help victims punish those who break the law in a way that ruins videos and limits free speech? And my other question is especially for those who watched the entire 1-hour VidCon panel discussion at tinyurl.com/VidConCopyright. Do you agree that the attitude of YouTube's representatives on that panel toward fair use was bare toleration at best?
YouTube, you decide.